Okay, today we're going to begin working our way through the lessons in the Biblical Hebrew Grammar by Kittel and Hoffer. So far you've been learning how to read and pronounce Hebrew, and today we'll actually begin translating a little Hebrew. This will be the first Hebrew that we translate. This is a very common phrase in the Hebrew Bible, and you will see it scattered throughout the Hebrew Bible. The first task is to identify the syllable divisions in this word, so that we can in these words, so that we can pronounce them. But you'll notice difficulties actually in both of these words. The first difficulty is that the second word has no vowels. This is a special word in biblical Hebrew. This is the divine name, Yud He Vav He. It's considered to be unpronounceable. That is, it's not supposed to be pronounced. This is true in the ancient rabbinic tradition and in many Jewish traditions today. Ordinarily, instead of pronouncing this word, the Jewish practice is to say the word for Lord, which is Adonai, whenever you encounter this word. So rather than pronouncing the Yud He Vav He, one would say Adonai. This is the Hebrew word, Adonai. You can see the vowels under the aleph, shva, after the dalet, holim, and under the nun, comets. Now, when we see the word Yud He Vav He printed in the Hebrew Bible, it is printed actually with the vowels of the word Adonai. That is, it is indicating that you should say Adonai instead of the divine name. So, if you move the shva, and you move the holim, and you move the comets, then you get something that looks sort of like this at the top of the page. Normally, the shva under the yod will be written as a simple shva, rather than the composite shva that was under the aleph. Now, if we rewrite the word here at the top of the page, this is the fully spelled form of the divine name. That is, it's the consonants of the word of the divine name Yud He Vav He, and the vowels of the word Adonai, Shva, Holim, and Comets. Now, this word actually is still not able to be pronounced. If you look at the word, you'll see that the Vav here is functioning both as a vowel, that is, it's a Holim Vav, Ho, and it's also functioning as a consonant, Va. So the Vav here is doing double duty, which is not actually possible. Now, frequently you'll see in Christian tradition, you'll see God referred to as Jehovah, and this is where that comes from, is the Yehovah, the mixture of the pronunciation of the syllables, the consonants of the divine name, Yud He Vav He, and the vowels of the word Adonai, Yehovah. You will rarely encounter the divine name written like this in the Hebrew Bible. Typically, you'll see it spelled this way, without the holim. This word is also unpronounceable, as you see the he has no vowel. So what all of this is trying to tell us is that when we see the word Yud He Vav He, the writers of the Hebrew Bible, the pointers of the text, the Masoretes, want us to say Adonai and not the divine name, and that will be our practice in this class. In the textbook, we will find this word written as you've seen, simply without the vowels. In the Hebrew Bible, we'll find it written this way. So, the second word then is Adonai. First word is this one. Now, this aleph, you'll notice, has no vowel and no shva, which according to our vowel rules is impossible. So this is one of the points at which our vowel rules need to be a little bit modified. This is what is known as a quiescent aleph. It's called quiescent because the aleph sits there quietly to itself. It actually has no pronunciation function in this word. In theory, you should have a shva under that aleph to look like this, but the aleph doesn't need the help of the shva. It's just closing the syllable all by itself. Now, here we see in the first, in the yod in this word, a dagesh, And every time we see a dagesh, we have to ask whether it is forte or linne. If you remember your rules, dagesh is linne if it is a bagad kafat letter that is either at the beginning of the word or following a silent schwa. In this case, we have a letter that is not a bagad kafat letter, it is not the beginning of a word, and it does not follow a silent schwa. Therefore, it is a dagesh forte. Now, if you remember, dagesh forte means that we have a doubling of the letter. Now, you will never see this word written this way, but one could imagine that we could show the doubled yod instead of the dagesh, and here then you would have vav yod yod aleph mem resh. In this case, the first yod is closing the syllable with the vav patach, and the second yod is the opening the syllable with the cholam and aleph. Remember the 4 rules of syllable division. First of all, syllables begin with one and only one consonant. Second, syllables contain one and only one vowel. Third, syllables may be open, ending in a vowel, or they may be closed, ending in a consonant, sometimes marked by silent schwa, in this case by quiescent aleph. And syllables can be accented or unaccented. If we apply this rule, we will see that the aleph here is functioning to close the syllable. So this word has these syllables, va, yo, and mer. The accent is on the middle syllable, so we will say vayomer, vayomer. Try it. Vayomer. Okay. Now you can pronounce this entire sentence. Try it. We would say Vayomer Adonai. Try that with me. Vayomer Adonai. Okay, so now we know how to say it, but we still don't know what it says. So if we're trying to translate this word, we've already discussed the meaning of the second word. This is the tetragrammaton, or the divine name, and it means the Lord. Sometimes you will see this written out just in English letters as YHWH, or Yud-He Waw-He, or Yud-He Vav-He. The first word requires a little work before we know what it means. So, first of all, the question is, what is the root of this word? The root of this word is aleph, mem, resh, the 3 letters at the end of the word. And the root, which you know from your vocabulary, means to say. Amar, he said. Now it may occur to you that we haven't talked about roots yet, and so we should pause for a second to say that Hebrew functions with a system of mostly 3-letter roots. We also, instead of 3-letter, we could also say triliteral. It is a triliteral root system. Words formed from these triliteral roots typically have related meanings. So the verb amar, aleph mem resh, means he said. The noun aimer means word or utterance. You see these 2 words have the same 3-letter root, aleph mem resh, different vowel pointings indicating one is a verb, the other is a noun. So the word meanings are related based on the root. It's also possible in Hebrew to have biliteral roots, and we will talk about that later. But once you know the root, you have some idea what the word means. So we know that this word before us, vayomer, is going to have something to do with saying. Okay. So if we're trying to determine what all of the different letters are doing in this word, we've now eliminated aleph, mem, and resh as the root. And so what we need to do now is explain the vav and the double yod. The vav, when it stands at the beginning of a word, means and. It can also mean but or so. Typically it's going to mean and. And whenever you see vav at the beginning of a word, you can assume that it is the particle and is not part of the root. It makes identifying the root easier. When you see vav in this particular form that we have here, vav followed by a patach, followed by a dagesh in the next letter, we could say vav patach doubling. This is indicating what is called the vav conversive, verbal form. It is called vav because it starts with a vav, and conversive because it's converting a form that we haven't learned yet. We'll talk about in just a minute. Okay, anytime we encounter a word that is a vav conversive, that is that it begins with vav, patach, double, then we know some things automatically. First of all, we know that it's a verb. We won't see a noun that begins this way. Second, we know that it is a verb in the past tense. Vav, patach, double is forming a preterite, which is in the sense of past tense. And we know that it is a prefix form of the verb. Now, the prefix form of the verb is one of two ways that Hebrew forms verbs. One way is by adding a prefix to the root, which is the prefix form. The second way is by adding a suffix to a root, which we call the suffix form or the affix form. The vav conversive is a special case of the prefix form. Now, the prefix is the letter that we haven't accounted for yet. So right now we've accounted for the root, aleph mem resh, we've accounted for vav patach double, and then what is left is the yod. The yod is the prefix in this word. So what can we learn from the fact that the prefix is a yod and not some other letter? The prefix tells us the person, he, she, it, or they, the third person. You is the second person, I or we being the first person. In the case of the yod, it's indicating third person masculine. It tells us the gender, whether it's masculine or feminine. We will not encounter a neuter in Hebrew. And it tells us the number, whether it is singular or plural. We can learn all of that by the prefix to the prefix form. The yod tells us that what we have is third person, masculine, singular. That is, subject of this verb is a he. Let's pause for just a second to look at the prefix form of the verb by itself without the vav conversive. This is the prefix form. We see the aleph mem resh root, and you see the yod prefix. The prefix form lacks the vav, the pasach, and the double. Prefix form generally has a future sense. He will say. The vav conversive converts the future sense to a past sense. Okay, now we can analyze the word, or parse the verb. You'll see this chart a lot this semester. First question is, what is the root of the word? We've already identified that this word comes from the root aleph mem resh. The second question is about the stem of the word. You only know one stem right now, and it's the cow. So the stem of this verb is the cow. Cow means light, and it's the most basic of the stems. We can spend just a second talking about Hebrew stems. You do not need to commit the details of this to memory right now, but just for your awareness of where we're headed. Hebrew verbs form in different stems, and the stems communicate something to us about the type of action and the voice, that is, whether the verb is active or passive. There's a lot of variability in the use of the stems, so you can't hold too rigidly to these generalizations here. But ideally, this is how things work. Cal is the basic and active form of the verb. So, for instance, I broke the dish. The subject is doing something to the object. The nifal is the passive form of the cal, essentially. Basic and either passive or reflexive. So the dish was broken, or the dish broke. The PL is either active and intensive, so I shattered the dish, that is an intensification of breaking the dish, or it's active and iterative, so I kept breaking dishes. I did the same action multiple times. Finally, the hifil is active and causative. I bumped the waitress and I caused her to break the dish. There are other stems in in Hebrew as well. The PL has a passive called the pual, the Hifil has a passive called the hofal, and then there are a few others as well. We will not get through all of these actually by the end of the semester. For right now, just you need to know that the cow. Okay, now we can return to our verb chart. We know the root and the stem. The next question is about the form. You have learned that the form of this word is, the choices are prefix or affix. You've learned that this is a prefix form. The next question is about person, gender, and number. You know that the yod indicates that this verb is third person, masculine singular, that is he. And then special features, you only know one special feature right now, and it is the vav conversive, indicated here by the vav, the patach, and the doubling of the yod. So this is a complete parsing of this verb. It is the kal prefix third masculine singular of amar, and it's a vav conversive. So now that we have the parsing, how do you translate this verb, vayomer? Third masculine singular means that the subject will be he. Prefix vav conversive means it will be past tense. And the kal of amar means to say. So, reading it very literally, and he said. The vav is both indicating and, as well as indicating the vav conversive. So, vayomer, and he said. Now, to translate the whole phrase, vayomer Adonai, we know that we have the verb, and he said, and we also have the word, the Lord. The question is the relationship between these two words. In Hebrew, the typical word order is the verb followed by the subject. And so if you have a noun immediately after a verb that agrees with the verb in person, gender, and number, then more than likely that noun is the subject of the verb. So, given that this is the case, that Adonai is a third masculine singular noun, and we have a third masculine singular verb, then we can assume that Adonai is the third masculine singular subject of this verb, and the translation is, and the Lord said. Alright, so you've translated now your first Hebrew phrase. Now let's look at a few more verb forms. So if you were to parse this verb, not necessarily knowing what it means, but just parsing the verb. First thing is to identify the root. You know that the root is the letters that are neither the prefix nor the vav conversive. So the root is shmar. The stem is going to be kal, which is the only one we know. We'll talk when we learn the next stem about how you identify which is which. The form again is prefix third masculine singular, and it's vav conversive. If you know that shmar means to watch, then this word would be translated as, and he watched. So our word, vayishmor, and he watched. We can also try this one, which is pronounced vayimtza, vayimtza. This again is parsed in the same way. This is the kal prefix third masculine singular of the root mem tzade aleph, and it is a vav conversive. If matzah means to find, then this form that would be translated, and he found. Okay, now moving on from verb forms, the last thing to talk about in this particular lesson is particles. Hebrew sometimes uses particles joined to a noun in order to express meaning, also sometimes joined to a verb. So, for example, if we have the noun bait, which means house, bait, we can add the preposition, the particle bet. When you add the particle bet, note that the bet at the beginning of house aspirants to a vet. If you remember, dagesh leni only occurs at the beginning of a word or after a silent shva. Now we have it following a vocal shva, and so it becomes bevayit. So bayit, bevayit, and adding the bait at the beginning changes the meaning of house to in a house. So bayit, house, bevayit, in a house. Similarly, eretz means land, be'eretz means in a land. So when we add the particle beit to the beginning of a noun, then we get the meaning in. It can also mean by means of, and it can also mean at. Now we've also got other inseparable particles. This one, the hey with the composite schwa, is basically a question mark. It indicates an interrogative. It comes at the beginning of a sentence, not at the end, so you have to know that you're looking for a question from the beginning. The vav with a schwa means and. Sometimes it means but, less frequently it means then or. Normally when you see vav, your first instinct will be and, but remember that it could also mean but, then, or. We also have the prefix k, kaf, with a vocal schwa. It means as or like or according to. And lamed, with a schwa, vocal schwa, means for or of. There are also particles that join two nouns and double the first letter of the word that they join. So for instance, we have the word melech, which means king, melech. We also have the word hamelech, which means the king. Here we have the prefix is, the particle is hey, patach, and a doubling of the following consonant. So this all together, hey, patach, double, means the. This is the definite article, the. Hey, patach, double. Notice how similar this looks to the interrogative particle. Remember that the interrogative particle is hey and then a composite schwa and no doubling, whereas the definite article is hey, patach, and double. We also have other particles that cause doubling. One is she, so here we have shin, sagol, double. This means who, which, or that. It's the relative particle. We also have mi, which is mem, hirek, double, which means from, out of, or sometimes more than. There's also another form of mi, which is actually a separate word, not an attached particle, and that form is min. Min also means from, out of, or more than. We'll talk about this more later, but min and mi with the doubling are the same, but the first is separable. Min is separable, whereas mi is attached. So congratulations, that's the end of Lesson 1. You are able now to translate Hebrew. Granted, not a great deal, but more than you could 25 minutes ago. So congratulations.